time for a brand new edition of Marvel in the 90s. Today we're talking about the Punisher Purgatory. The Punisher Purgatory is part of the initial launch of Marvel Knights in 1998. So they had done Daredevil with Kevin Smith. They had done The Inhumans with Jay Lee and Paul Jenkins. They had done Black Panther with Christopher Priest. And then Christopher Golden, Tom Sniegoski, Bernie Wrightson, Jimmy Palmiotti on The Punisher. So The Punisher had kind of been out of favor over the last few years at Marvel at this time. So this was a chance for Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti coming in from the Event Comics team, taking over Marvel Knights, and relaunching The Punisher. Now, the Marvel Knights was a very successful line-wide launch, but it took a few years for them to get Punisher right. This is the run that I come to know as the Spawnisher run. They tried to reinvent Punisher as a supernatural story. So let's get into it. First of all, every cover is amazing because it's done by Bernie Wrightson with Joe Quesada doing the painting, and it's beautiful. And Bernie Wrightson doing all the interior artwork is a big highlight in this run. So let's run through it real quick. The story starts and Punisher just shows up, and all of a sudden he's got these crazy looking guns that he can just pull out of his overcoat. He's got this crazy sigil burning on his face, and he's got eyes that are just glowing. So then we get introduced to the idea that there are angels and demons. And there's the dude down there in the bottom. That's a demon whose name is Oliver. Seriously, this is a demon named Oliver. So those are a couple of angels. He goes, he kills these angels. You're like, what's going on? He's sucking the angel juice out of them. And don't you just think it's dumb that this fallen angel, this demon, is known as Oliver? That's so stupid to me. Anyway, as one of the angels is dying, he finds Frank Castle and he tells him that he's got a special role to play and he was brought back for a reason. What? Brought back from what? Then he winds up meeting this guy named Gadriel. That's a better name for an angel. Turns out Gadriel was the guardian angel who failed in his mission to protect Frank's family and is responsible for the death of Frank's family. So Frank does, guess what? And one cool thing about this run is that he's got this new thing. When the Punisher shows up, he just says, pray. Now, I'll tell you this. I appreciate the idea and the look of the supernatural Punisher. The futuristic angel heaven-sent guns are really weird because basically what Frank finds out from this guy is that he died and he's been resurrected by this guy who gave up some of his angelic essence to bring back Frank Castle to help him on a mission. And now every time he pulls out of his overcoat, he pulls whatever weapon he wants at the time, which I think is a weird concept when everything he pulls out is some kind of crazy heaven weapon. That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, he tries to kill Gadriel a few times, but it doesn't work because he's an angel. And Gadriel's like, look, you're in this middle of this battle between evil and good, angels and demons, heaven and hell. Yeah, it's the Spawnisher, Mike. You know what I'm saying. So then you find out that Oliver is actually trying to increase his influence as a ruler of hell. He was actually very ambitious as a demon. Satan, Mephisto, and the other rulers of hell decided to banish him. So they actually sent him into the soul of a human, and he lived this whole life until he realized who he was, and he made these grand plans, and now he's trying to take over hell, principality and province at a time, right? So then he sends his army to attack Damian Hellstorm because he's another prince of hell. So Damian Hellstorm becomes a part of the story, and then he winds up teaming up with Punisher and Gadriel against Oliver and his demonic horde. And I guess it's okay and it's interesting, but you keep having this mystery of what happened to Punisher. I almost said Spawn. How did he die? How did he come back? So Gadriel takes him to these other angels, and they basically tell him the story, but then they get attacked by the Forcers. Now, it seems like all of these people, all these henchmen of Oliver's, the demon Oliver. Yeah, that sounds threatening, right? So the demon Oliver is sending these dudes, and it seems like all of them are people, spirits of people that Frank Castle has killed, including this one who looks really weird and kind of kinky. And he shows up and he's supposed to be a big deal, but then they just kind of leave it dangling at the end of it. But what he finds out is that Punisher actually killed himself, and Gadriel brought him back to life to avenge him. So there's a great image of Punisher by Bernie Wrightson crawling out of the grave and becoming this avenging angel spirit. Once again, a great image, and I really appreciate it, but those guns really kind of throw it off. So then Oliver shows up and actually reveals that he's responsible for the death of Frank Castle's family. Yup, it turns out that in his human form, once he had awakened, he set all of this up so that they would kill Frank's family, and Frank would now become almost like a worker for Oliver. So in his vengeance, right, there was a sacrifice that was going on that was a part of it. And in fact, they're trying to say here that the markings on Oliver's face, the demonic face, is actually the skull that Frank is wearing. So everybody that Frank has killed has been a soul that Oliver's been collecting. That's how he's able to build up this power. And he also set it up so that he was responsible. Frank eventually finds this out. This is a bit of a retcon on Punisher history, but he finds out that this dude is responsible and he goes and kills him. And then that's when he's finally free. He returns to hell from his banishment because he gets killed, and he starts his grand plans to take over. Once he had enough Frank Castle souls amassed, he decided to send his demons in. They would torture him, and that's why Frank kills himself. Gadriel brings him back. So then you have this idea that he's stuck between heaven and hell. Who is he going to fight for? He's been fighting for hell. Now he's got to make the decision. Is he going to hide? Is he going to hide away, or is he going to fight for hell, or is he going to fight for heaven? He decides, you know what, screw both of y'all. I'm my own man. I'm going to do my own thing. And then they just have this big final battle. He fights this crazy, I don't know, this guy just looks weird, right? When he fights him with a sword, he pulls a sword out of his overcoat with an axe. And it just has a really typical ending. A portal opens up and it sucks the angel and the demon away, and it's gone. And then Frank Castle, of course, is still there, and the angel goes away as well. And he's still stuck between heaven and hell. And what is he going to do? He's going to become the Punisher yet again. And of course, now he's got these angelic powers, and to be continued. Right? But that's not quite what happened. There was one more series after it. It was a Wolverine Punisher Revelations miniseries. It was written by the same writers, but it had Pat Lee on the artwork this time. I have that. We will cover that eventually. Here are my original copies. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. That's my favorite cover of the bunch. Oh, I love it. And then number 4. These covers are beautiful, and they're brilliant. All in all, it's an interesting idea, but it was a very insufficient attempt at trying to make Frank Castle popular again. But what happened is it eventually led to Marvel Knights turning it over to Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, which gave us great Punisher work for years to come. Overall, I like it for its place in Marvel history of the 90s. It's weird. It's eccentric. They always do these weird things with Punisher. This is the second Punisher story we've covered in just a few bits doing this stuff. And it's because they do the wildest things. They turned him into a Frankenstein monster one time. And in the 90s, they turned him into an avenging angel spirit. And then they turned him into a black man. We've already covered that one. Now we've covered the Spawnisher, the avenging angel Punisher. One of my favorite things, though, is that in the year 2000, when Garth Ennis took over, he had to explain, because after the next series after this one, the whole idea of the Spawnisher's done, right? And he's just regular badass Frank Castle again. And the whole idea of Oliver and all that stuff is never mentioned again. And I think that dangling villain, I don't even know, maybe he came back in the next one. I got to remember. I don't remember. We're going to have to check that one out. But, man, what a wild story. But what it did was, when Garth Ennis had to explain it away, he did it in just a simple line. Like Frank says something like, a bunch of angels told me they wanted me to fight for him. I showed him where to stick it. He just gives it up. He basically just gives up the power off panel in between issues. Anyway, the run itself is not very good, but it's worth picking up as an oddity. It's not hard to find. They're very cheap usually when you can find them. The covers are great. They're worth it for the covers alone. They're great Halloween Horror Fest related Punisher covers. And it's just great for this weird, quirky place in Marvel history. Why are you going to try to... Yeah, it's like Ghost Rider, except for from heaven. So it's like the reverse of Spawn and Ghost Rider, but with the Punisher and angels. And it's weird, and it's wild, and it was slightly related to Horror Fest, and that's why we talked about it tonight on Marvel in the 90s.